Welcome back to part two of our whistleblowers, Jennifer Griffith and Sarah Carver, and their look at the huge fraud that was perpetrated upon Social Security in the disability area. And part one, we covered, Jennifer and Sarah, about the fraud and how you kept ringing the bell. And at some point, obviously, you retained attorneys. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, because I'm particularly impressed with Mark Wolander, who connected us up. And of course, you had Benjamin Bernea. And yes. At what point did you secure their services?
I began researching, we both began researching litigation in 2011 because we weren't getting any progress, and we knew that we needed more help. And once the Wall Street Journal had sort of reached out, we knew that we were in above our heads. And so I found Ben Bernea, and then Ben Bernea needed someone who was local counsel for us, in the Kentucky court system. And so he had a previous working relationship with Mark Wolander, and so he brought him in. So that was sometime in early 2011.
How important would you tell other whistleblowers it is to get an attorney?
I think we should have gotten one sooner.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so it's extremely important. And to make sure that you get one that has whistleblower experience, especially key town litigation, because that's so complicated.
So complicated. And I've seen whistleblowers who have lost their cases because, the deadlines, all the minutia that goes along with whistleblowing, and some whistleblowers, if they don't have lawyers, they miss these arbitrary deadlines which are set up to trap whistleblowers. And so it took you, what do you say, 5-6 years to get an attorney after, and all this retaliation was going on, you were being beaten up.
I mean, we went to DC and we were even turned down by some representatives. I don't think some people just understood the scope of what we were.
It's a complicated process to explain in and of itself. And I think it was very hard for people to understand what we were trying to say and explain to them how it was going to affect everyone, how it affects every U.S. taxpayer. It's complicated.
That was hard, and it was also hard, even to begin with, to get any congressman or representative, because who wants to be associated with Social Security benefits being taken away from their constituents?
Yeah.
So no one was concerned about almost 500,000 for sure, close to $1 billion probably, of taxpayer money going down the toilet.
Joe Manchin surely wasn't, because that's who we went to begin with
when he was the governor of the state of West Virginia. Yeah. And we went to him before he was ever in Congress. And
yeah,
it's just, we couldn't quantify how big it was in the early stages. So we couldn't say, hey, we think this is 550 million or 2 billion or whatever, because we had no idea how large. We had no idea how many bribes had been paid. We had no idea how much in fees he had been granted, because that was something that we couldn't really absolutely quantify. So it was very hard for us to describe how big this could be.
But that's the job of investigative agencies like the FBI or the internal agencies of these federal bureaucratic groups. Where were they? They should have been, they come to you and say, well, how much were the bribes? That's not your job. I mean, where were these people who should have been investigating?
And the OIG certainly abdicated their responsibility here.
And why did they do that?
Because it's a black mark against Social Security. And again, it is essentially Social Security protecting itself. And seems to be this is why you will never see
their final reports on this issue.
There seems to be this internal mechanism to make sure that the public doesn't know how badly they screwed up or how much damage they've done. General public thinks when we talk about Social Security that we're talking about taking it away from deserving people. And that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a system that is grossly mismanaged and could be easily,
it's a broken system.
Yeah, and it could be easily taken advantage of again. And it's going to be if you don't oversight it.
Correct. And you actually went to Washington, spoke in front of a congressional hearing, correct? And what did they do?
Other than Dr. Coburn made Dr. Tom Coburn made referrals to the Southern District of West Virginia and Eastern District of Kentucky, who declined to prosecute our case. And to this day, no one knows why. But one of the important facts about our hearing was that you see us testify and Eric Conn employees testify, and you see some of the physicians, and you see our administrative law judge, and you see Eric Conn plead the fifth, but what you don't see is any member of Social Security being there to testify because they were on a government shutdown. But what we were promised was a supplemental hearing, which never happened.
So you did go to Congress, you did testify, they made a referral to the state, nothing happened. Today, nothing is happening with that angle. So let's talk about DOJ. Where were they during this incredible mess, this incredible fraud? Where were they?
Okay, well, they were worried about whether or not we were on a boat. And that was the question asked of us. And even they even went to some of the other Social Security employees. I think they were trying to tie us to Judge Daugherty and Judge Daugherty's boat, because you would think as whistleblowers, you would be part of the investigation. You would be working with Department of Justice.
But that didn't happen.
That didn't happen in our case. The only question that I was asked was questions about a picture of me on a boat on social media. I wanted to know if it was Judge Daugherty's boat.
What was the idea behind that? You and Judge Daugherty had something going. You were a spurned mistress.
It felt like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe that we were a part of, of something, but we were the ones reporting it. And
we really got asked any in-depth questions by DOJ regarding the details of the fraud. And we weren't even, until the special prosecutor got involved, which was Trey Alford. And still Trey Alford asked us about that boat. And I got that offer. I did get that opportunity at the Apple, the premiere of the Big Conn in Texas, and he was there. And I asked him about it. I was like, what was it with the boat?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, we have to eliminate, we have to start and we have to eliminate, people that were a part of the fraud. Okay. Well, once you eliminated that, I said, we weren't even a part. You didn't even ask us any questions. You did not, basically keep us updated. You treated us bad. I mean,
and there were so many failures on their part.
Yeah, and we try to stay in contact, in reporting certain things, and we'll talk about the cases that we found. And oh my gosh, we were told to just mind our business and to back off.
We were told specifically to stop investigating.
Yeah.
And we
we were still uncovering things that they weren't aware of.
So if you were to make a guess, or one of your attorneys was to make a guess, what was happening with DOJ that they were such an impotent agency?
That they were holding us to a very strict interpretation of key TAM law, but also they were antagonistic towards Sarah because she was still a federal government employee, and they took a very poor view of federal government employees who blow the whistle, and that sort of made the case
It set the
difficult.
tone.
It set the tone for the whole case, and it made us really struggle because one of the early failures in his case was that the DOJ made no effort to seize Mr. Conn's assets. So, we filed a key tam lawsuit in early 2011. Mr. Conn is allowed to spend almost up until the point that he runs. So we're talking 6-7 years, and he is just burning through cash.
Never, not once was a search warrant issued to his property.
Yeah, not ever.
Ever.
The only thing, they went in and looked in his office after he
ran.
escaped,
After he ran.
but they didn't do anything with what they found in the office. No one did. And they were just looking to see if he was in there. And
Right.
so
No computers were seized, no records were seized.
you could have, maybe those computers contained information about transfer of funds or anything like that. Nobody cared. Literally no one cared.
Did they subpoena bank accounts? Did they do any of the basic investigative work that needed to be done? I mean, they came up with this figure, $500 million. First of all, it was a civil complaint, not criminal, correct?
Right.
So they came up they came up with this figure. They had to get that figure from somewhere.
Well, we don't specifically know anything about the accounting because despite our attorneys requesting more information on the breakdown of what was recovered, we were denied that. So when we won our whistleblowers case, we won, I believe the figure is $31 million, but we're not the only people that have a claim against this. And we entered in an agreement with the Department of Justice that they would pay us 25% of whatever was recovered. And,
Right.
at that point, there wasn't a lot left.
But there was some.
There was some. Enough, there was some left.
But they made no attempt to really go after those assets.
Correct.
I mean, someone with that much money would have probably property, maybe even in other countries, multiple properties, Bitcoin information. There was their assets, cars, and we know that he had really nice, elaborate vehicles, and nothing was done to seize those assets, period.
At any point.
Now, one of your attorneys made an interesting comment about DOJ and their feelings toward whistleblowers. Will you share that with us?
It was that they took a very antagonistic view of federal government employees who become whistleblowers. That their view was not as antagonistic towards me because I wasn't an employee anymore, but they were more antagonistic against Sarah because she was still a federal government employee. And
so you're telling me that the DOJ has certain feelings, negative feelings, toward whistleblowers who are still employed by the government?
I mean, that's our understanding of why our case was handled the way it was handled. And you got to remember, in the key tam case, the DOJ has to intervene and take the case up upon a whistleblower's behalf, as you well know. That didn't happen for us the way it happens in a lot of cases. They just remained an interested party almost up until the point that the criminal indictment happened. They just remained an interested party. So it wasn't until
up to the statute of limitations was getting ready to run.
So until we testified before Congress in 2013, federal judge at that time was Amul Thapar, and until Judge Thapar basically held their feet to the fire and told them, fish or cut bait, they just remained an interested party. And in a case like a Social Security case, where your cases are identified by Social Security numbers, it's impossible for a whistleblower to enumerate how big the fraud is. And they knew that. Everyone would know that. So it left us in a very difficult position.
If we provided them with Social Security numbers, then they would have come back on us. Our attorney's fear was that we would have had, PII we have
The feds
government
put charges.
Yeah, and we all know that we're not allowed to, but we're not supposed to have that in our garages or our homes.
Right.
So therefore, and they've destroyed everything at the office. So they were basically trying to hold us to the standard of, well, what proof do you have?
And Social Security is refusing to comply with congressional investigations and provide that information, saying it would tie up the federal system and
It would take years to
for them to
accumulate,
provide.
and it would literally be report, something that we could push a button and get.
So you have
So-
multiple agencies not cooperating and not doing their job.
So
And-
what good is a congressional hearing if they can't get anything done?
Well, I don't really know, because we are still waiting on policy changes, and we are still waiting on things that will keep this situation from happening again and keep whistleblowers like us protected. Because one thing that I think we both very heavily agreed on is that if you are a Social Security employee and you do what some of the Social Security employees did here, you should be charged with a crime.
Yes.
But also, you shouldn't get to retire with your full government pension.
Bingo. This has been a complaint about the FBI for eons. And it just, I guess everyone has taken a lesson from the Bureau. Just let them retire out.
And that's what they
And
did.
managers know that. I mean, they know if they thought that maybe that they would not get their benefits, you think maybe that might kind of affect their decision and what they do, but they know
There's no penalty.
there's no penalty. We
Right.
can just either they'll move us to a different agency, they'll promote us, they will let us retire.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened.
Judge Daugherty, for example, the Wall Street Journal story comes out, he's on admin leave and immediately retires.
Yeah.
I mean,
But they did get him. He was charged.
Yeah,
he was
he was charged. Judge Andrus wasn't, and they had physical proof.
let's rephrase that. They have proof that he took bribes now, and they've never charged him.
How come they went after one judge, not the other?
That's a really good question.
That's something the DOJ would have to answer to.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And you see in the docuseries, Trey Offers says, we were just happy to get what we could get.
What we could get. But the thing about it is they were handed an OIG report that said, here is approximately like 40 cases in which Judge Andrus received X amount of cash. He finally admitted to it, but he was never charged.
Yeah.
It only takes one case to be charged with
Right.
fraud. One case.
Why do you suppose that is? If you were to make a supposition, go ahead, fire away. Why did they charge one and not the other?
They weren't really ever interested in charging
They weren't-
anybody in a case to begin with.
Yeah, I don't think that they had never subpoenaed any records from Conn. I really think that it was just going to be a plea deal.
And it was.
Yeah, and Conn's attorney, Scott White, he said, Eric was probably looking at max 7 years for this. It wasn't going to go to trial.
He had proffered.
He had proffered, and they were making a deal. Well, then all of a sudden Eric got crazy and left and made all of them look like idiots. And then they were like sitting there, wait a minute, we're holding this case and we really don't have any.
You gotta remember,
evidence.
federal prosecutors didn't want to prosecute this case. No one
Right.
wanted to touch it. No one.
There were so many people that had political ties, money ties to Eric Conn. A lot of political figures.
And that's some of the things that don't make it into the docuseries, is that there is evidence and information out there that money was paid to more than just these judges in our office. And you see throughout the life of our case that he's constantly changing attorneys, and there are reasons for those, and that involves money, and
Yes.
that's money that he wouldn't have had to do these things with had they seized his assets when they should have.
Exactly. Exactly. You guys are so wise, and you were so on this. It just is confounding the screw ups by the federal government. But however, for considering what you did, and it was you two, Conn was indicted in April of 2016.
Yes.
And he was found guilty in 2017. And then of course he took off, and they caught him, I believe, in another country. And he currently got 12 years in prison,
Actually, he had 27.
27.
Yeah. Two different charges.
Right. Because they put of course, he took off.
Yes.
And to note with that, the money that he ran on was given to him by the Department of Justice for his monthly expenses.
Yeah, I sent that document over that we had discussed so that we could talk about, a little bit about his plea agreement and the money that they allotted him during that plea agreement. It kind of spells out what they were going to pay for, and his attorney was like making a motion to return that money. And
to him, to the subject. Yeah. To the convicted subject.
So one of the things that we talk about with regards to DOJ and their failures, and extends all the way through to people who are believing that he wouldn't escape, from Kentucky court judges, declined to incarcerate him because they just believed he wasn't a flight risk, despite everybody saying he said that he would flee the country if he ever got caught.
And he did. And he did.
And he made no secret of that.
I mean,
No.
he was a traveler. He usually went out of the country at least once a month. Even through this whole federal investigation, he was leaving and going out of the country. And an employee said he would go for a week and then we would have to call him because he would stay. I mean, he would stay for weeks on end.
And I mean, it's just one in an extremely long list of things that were not handled appropriately.
No, it's flabbergasting. And the DOJ, though, there was a $31 million civil judgment, which was supposed to go to the government and you two whistleblowers. Tell us what happened to the $31 million.
Sarah and I had gone to Washington in March of 2008 to try and get some more interest in this case, because we knew that the DOJ had engaged in an agreement with him to pay for certain things that were false. And we come back and
we even found through our investigation where Eric had opened up another company, another disability company, and put it like in his mom's name so he could still be getting these fee checks from the Social Security. Okay, none of that, the DOJ didn't care. We sent them that information. Look, he's still getting money coming in from the government underneath this.
The government agreed to pay 2 of his employees to copy and distribute client files. But that never happened. It was just money.
It was just another expense. They were giving him out money. They were giving him out $2,500 a month for rent.
A company called Midwest Network Solutions was created, in which it was supposed to create software to scan and do the files. But that software already exists. That's just a fabrication. And so Sarah arranged for us to go into Conn's vacant law office. And so we go in
with the permission of one of Conn's employees and his mother.
And so we go through and we when we get in there, we cannot believe what we're seeing. We are seeing floor to ceiling boxes of files. Those are closed files that we thought were destroyed
because the claimants were told
that they were destroyed.
That those were destroyed. Now, keep in mind, claimants are now going through like hearings that they have to prove that they're not disabled now, but they were disabled during the time, back when they first got their benefits. That could have went back 8 years. So those files were needed because a lot of the doctors had already discarded those records or had retired. Those records weren't available. And so they couldn't prove their cases. And the government, the DOJ, was telling them that there were no files. And
Ned Pillersdorf was actively trying to help these people, but you're hitting a brick wall. Because of the way the rule states is you can't use any new evidence, you have to have old evidence, and it can't be the old evidence that was previously submitted that they deemed fraudulent. So it's very complicated. And
yes.
This information was sitting in his law office.
So he had floor to ceiling boxes of closed files. And describe to you how massive this was. And then you go into other rooms and there are just stacks of open pending disability claims.
Not secured, windows open,
Not anything.
vagrants had been in there, you know, squatting. It was just, it was unreal. I mean, we were just we were just amazed. There's no words for it. We're just like, we're just looking at each other like, oh my God. And so the first thing that we do is we notify one of the main attorneys for these claimants. And when that happened, it just hit the fan. And so that's when that's when the DOJ notified our attorneys and said, you need to tell them to back off. And obviously they were pissed.
But what ended up happening was, whenever somebody is disbarred, and whenever you have an attorney who basically dies or leaves practice, each state has their own policy for how they're going to handle that law firm. And it's a state process, not a federal process. And the Kentucky Bar Association abdicated all responsibility for those files. Just said, and I mean, and I have their quotes. And so we cooperated with a Washington Post reporter, and that Post reporter got comments from both Social Security and from the Kentucky Bar Association. And everybody basically said, we don't know anything about it, or we're not going to do anything about it. So they had to get someone appointed in order to handle those files. And the person that was appointed was then paid, the receiver that was appointed was then paid from the files. So all the money from the civil judgment that would have been entitled to us for 25%,
we now had to pay a receiver because we told them the files were there. And then we should have already got our percent before. I mean, that was it. That was, I mean, that's their problem. Those files,
not our fault.
Not our fault. Okay, not our fault.
Right.
So we basically,
but they got mad and they said, well, now that you've discovered these files, we're going to pay a receiver and we're going to pay them. I mean, it was close to $1 million to index these files
and distribute them.
There was already an index in there.
We
could look at Conn's. We tried it. We could look at his index, and if it was John Smith, you just went to the S's and you seen Smith and it said box number blank. And you could go to that box and you could pull it out. You didn't have to create a new program.
But keep in mind, his agreement with DOJ had already paid 2 of his employees to copy and scan these files, and a third party to pay to create software to scan these files. That's already been done.
But he took that money and ran.
But even more so, the agreements that Eric Conn engaged with in his former law partner, David Hicks, to create a third-party company named Disability Services. Disability Services. This third-party company was created in which David Hicks assumed responsibility for the files of the Conn's law office. And I do have a copy of those agreements. That man should have been charged.
Yeah. He's the one that's supposed to have assumed responsibility for the files.
3 other people that were responsible for that distribution that never happened.
So let me ask you this, because this seems such a cluster, you know, the second word, that I cannot believe this. Did you see any federal presence, law enforcement presence during the entire time, all these years? Did you ever see any federal law enforcement presence?
You mean
looking into this case, taking files, doing subpoenas, doing search warrants?
Yeah, not until he escaped and made everybody look like a fool.
No one ever investigated his office until he escaped.
Till he ran.
Because, you know, I later visited him in prison, and I specifically asked him, I said, Eric, I said, was there ever, one warrant served on you regarding, he said, there was never, not one person served a warrant on that office, on computers, on records, on zero, nothing.
Did he say why? Did he give a reason why he thought?
I don't think that he knows. I mean,
I think he expected it. I think that's why
we didn't later find out that the OIG insisted, because the FBI is blaming it on the OIG is blaming it on the FBI. OIG said they tried to get search warrants and the judge wouldn't give them any search warrants. I think one of the investigators said, we have a file like this thick where we tried to request, like a search warrant, and the judge wouldn't sign off on it. Yeah, go figure what kind of, I think a Kentucky judge, it was probably a Kentucky judge.
And I think that goes back to the federal prosecutors declining to get involved. But this is what the Kentucky Bar Association said. The KBA was not aware that any client files might still exist until we were contacted by the DOJ on Tuesday. And this was April 11, 2018. He said in an email, there had been widely circulated stories of records being destroyed by shredding or burning, and at no time prior to Tuesday was the KBA contacted by any party concerning any possible client records.
Was that a lie?
Yes. I think
Okay.
so.
Okay, there you go.
I don't have proof of that, but
you had
no way. There was no way they did not know. They had disbarred him. They knew his practice was closed.
Okay, that would be the
in the Big Conn, one of the episodes, it even talks about the Office of Inspector General and Tim Morton and his boss going in there and them seeing, and this is why they were looking for him. Okay, they had been in there. It shows them, they thought that he was hiding in his office. They're seeing those files. So yes, at least we know the OIG knew those files were there. Yep. Social Security OIG knew those files were there and said nothing.
Not only did they know that the files were there, they knew that there were computer hard drives present and a phone, a cordless phone in a box that says "Do not destroy." Message from DBD on it.
I found that just sitting out in the open in his office.
It's just right there.
It was marked on it. Do not destroy DBD messages. That's Judge Daugherty messages. Now, wouldn't that have been kind of important to the investigation?
Yeah. Criminal case ongoing, civil case ongoing. No, this isn't important. We don't need this.
But KBI, gals, that is the Kentucky Bureau of Investigation, correct?
Well, we're talking about the Kentucky Bar Association.
Okay, the Bar Association
did not receive. I don't know about KBI.
Okay, so, but there was no federal presence. You didn't have any FBI, DOJ, marshals, no one from the federal government who came in on this massive fraud and provided any investigative tools, activities, nothing.
Because
not until he escaped.
Because they did not want them involved.
And it turns out the OIG you're talking about is Washington, right? The OIG under Social Security.
Yes.
Yeah, the one that's supposed to investigate Social Security, their own people.
So you're kind of telling me that as long as the state authorities hide this criminal conduct from the feds, they can get away with it. Or the feds are not interested in coming in into a state intervention. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, there was no state intervention. I mean,
they recused themselves.
They abdicated their responsibility in both Southern District of West Virginia and Eastern District of Kentucky.
To the feds. And then that took a special prosecutor. And even once a special prosecutor was appointed, they still didn't do anything.
There was still no one looked in his office for anything.
Right.
And you would and you would think, you're going to go to trial. Would you not want to?
If they had gone to trial, if they had gone in those offices before they went to trial, I can't imagine how much more would have come to light.
Right. They weren't interested, were they?
No, they weren't. No.
Right. So out of that 31 million civil, now there's a criminal also. There's a forfeiture in the criminal, but under the DOJ 31 million civil judgment, you have not seen even close to a reasonable amount out of that, have you?
Oh God, no.
No.
Have you seen anything out of it?
Yes, we have seen some.
And it's very minuscule when you're talking.
I would say it is. It is less than my yearly salary.
Oh dear. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So where did the rest of that 31 million go?
Well, over 400,000 roughly. This is just without having it in front of me.
Went to a law firm to index those records.
Yes, and distribute those files.
And then we've got some that went to Eric Conn's monthly expenses.
And
to keep it, to pay his rent and his child support. They paid his child support off for him.
multiple years of his child support.
Yeah, they paid off of the rest of his child support for him.
Okay, but the judgment stipulates it goes to the government and the whistleblowers. His child support is not the government or a whistleblower.
Neither is his
Part of their,
his
neither were
immunizations.
his church donations, his immunizations, his dental, none
His
of that.
His vitamins, they paid him for his vitamins.
Yep,
His
none of that.
haircuts, his
This
groceries.
people would say that this has got to be fantasy because
I know. I know.
it's crazy. It's
No one
cuckoo.
believes us when we tell them just how bad it is, because
It's bad. It's bad.
we know that he had a lot more money going into this, and had any action been taken early on to seize those assets, we might be looking at something different. But also, it probably would have.
I mean, they even paid 2 assistants. They were paying while he's literally sitting on a house arrest. They're paying a couple of employees that he kept employed. One of those employees was involved in the private investigator that followed me.
He basically paid Curtis Wyatt.
He paid Curtis Wyatt, which was the one that
Followed you
followed
around.
me and had an arsenal of weapons he carried around in a duffel bag and went into the office and bragged about it. And the government is paying Kenneth Sturgill as an employee of Curtis Wyatt as employees of Eric Conn while he's on home arrest, and they already know Sturgill or Wyatt. It was Wyatt's involvement in following me, filming me.
But they're going ahead and paying him anyway.
But they're going to
copy files.
But the copy files are going to pay him to copy files when he's already been questioned in here. They already know that he had a participation in following me.
And Curtis Wyatt was never charged with that.
Now, you informed the government that this was going on.
Yes.
Yes.
They didn't care?
We actually sent an email in July of that year that we discovered that to Kim Heidel with the Kentucky court system, because basically Dustin Davis and Elizabeth Wright with the DOJ were not responding to us. And we notified them everything in this motion that was filed with the court that was inaccurate, and that we were concerned for our safety.
And that this man was following you. You informed them of that specific fact.
We informed them of everything that we had been notified of, and that we had found out in 2013 that Curtis Wyatt was in fact the one that was hired to follow us. And we informed them that, Wyatt has never been charged with this crime. He's never been arrested. Nothing has ever happened. But moreover, you're now paying him and another coworker who aren't exactly people that copy files. They were more like laborers. And you're paying these
They were just basically 2 thugs that Eric paid them to do lawn work, to do, to anything miscellaneous. We were told, well, if you're concerned about your safety, then contact your local law enforcement,
who also has no idea why we're contacting them. But
they're just like, no, we've never heard of it. What do you want us to do?
Yeah. So, we sent this email to Kim Heidel, and I think it was like in July of 2017, roughly, right before Conn was sentenced in absentia. And, we can't get through to Dustin Davis or Elizabeth Wright, but Kim Heidel, she just took our whole email and forwarded it on to them so that we have proof that was sent. And nothing happened. I mean, like nothing. And this was a year before we found the files in his office.
So I want everyone to be aware of the fact the government was paying people out of this civil judgment. And one of these things that they were paying was for a person to follow you around, harassing you, photographing you. That's just unconscionable. And that was true, correct?
Correct.
And he was also hit with a forfeiture of $5,750,404. Was that ever paid?
No. No.
You know, this is such a hard story to believe because it's like you two are out in the wilderness crying out, and absolutely no one is listening to you nor doing anything for you.
No.
They're totally ignoring this massive crime that's occurring. Could this have only happened in Kentucky? Or could you tell me if it could happen in Washington, D.C., in Seattle, Washington? Is this just something that could happen in Kentucky and it's so unbelievable?
The system is broken and it can be taken advantage of unless they change the way they.
And it was because there was another attorney
Yeah, it
from
happened
Bender
again
from Bender and Bender
at
and-
this at the
in
same time.
Chicago or something like that.
I can't remember without looking at it, but
It was another
was
law
happening
firm about
again.
the same time that it was happening there too. So yes, it can and it will happen again.
It's not just Kentucky because that's the poorest area.
It happened in Puerto Rico.
Okay. It happens everywhere.
it could happen anywhere. I mean, we had a perfect storm in our office. You know, we had like this thing, but anytime SSA gets in a relationship with an attorney in the way that these judges got in this relationship with this attorney, you are setting yourself up for favoritism. And that's something that cannot exist in a program where you're trying to determine disability. I mean, they actually set up, SSA actually paid for and set up video hearing equipment in Mr. Conn's office so that his clients could go to only his attorney's office and have their video hearings. I don't know that that's happened for anybody else. I mean, Social Security does video hearings, but it's always been at a remote approved government site, not in your local attorney's office. And if you're an attorney that can advertise that I have this service available to you, you're just giving him more clients. And they made no effort to stop any of this. And we just frankly didn't care.
Right. It seems that they didn't care. And it turns out, it seems to me, money is the basic factor running through all of this.
Oh.
Money, 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 money. And Social Security was throwing it out like confetti. No one seemed to really care. And you're right. People are talking about Social Security and how it's going broke, but they don't seem to care, do they?
No, and when we went back to Washington in 2018, you know, we've spoken with a number of people over the years, and one of the things that we've always tried to make them aware of is that if you could put more oversight on disability and help reform that program the way it really needs to be formed, and we are not talking about taking benefits away from people that deserve it. We are talking about preserving that for the people who do.
And Senator Langford was the one that we had talked with, and his people were supposed to get us in contact
with somebody in economic policy at the White House.
At the White House, and that never happened.
No. And as a matter of fact, we've had no follow-up with that office, and we've tried emailing that staff member in that office, and we've had no follow-up since
And
then.
his office, I mean, he's the one that took over what basically Tom Cabron had did when Tom had stepped down and is later died from cancer. And we really had high hopes because he was he had followed it, he knew what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And he was telling us about the times would be good to get involved when
and he had proposed reforms that were reasonable.
that were really reasonable. So we knew he had looked into it, and then he just dropped it. I mean, it was just dropped.
And he told us in that meeting, he said, you know, Social Security isn't in the spotlight right now. It's going to take something bringing it back into the spotlight for these things to take effect. And then that just never happened. We've had no follow-up congressional hearing. We've had no follow-up in terms of speaking with anybody regarding economic policy or whistleblower reform, or anything regarding making these people who committed these crimes within the agency be responsible and not allowed to retire with their full government pension. Like, something has to happen. Because if not, there is no incentive for them other than just their own moral compass,
which we know that that
doesn't always exist,
doesn't exist.
Does not exist.
to not do it.
Are you in this? Are you in this fight for the rest of your life? Are you committed to this cause?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's what we hope. We hope that every time something comes out, like even with the Big Conn, we had hoped that that would bring it up into the foresight and that we would be talking to people that could get us in contact with the right people that could make policy.
That was
change, and
the whole
that's what we
purpose.
want.
That's what we wanted. That was the whole purpose for participating in that, was to get that exposure.
And we want accountability and oversight. And that is something that we have yet to see.
I'm just amazed at you two. I seriously, I give you the greatest gratitude. I give you the greatest praise. Are there any words that you can give to other whistleblowers? I mean, you've been through hell, as most whistleblowers. You have been through hell. What kind of advice can you give to other whistleblowers that would help them?
Document everything.
Yeah. I remember when I tell everybody when I took that job, my dad told me one thing: never delete anything.
And they, even after this was this investigation started, they enacted, the Social Security enacted a policy now that you do not own your emails, and you are to delete all emails after a certain period of time. So then that makes it to like what we did. We wouldn't have, by the time we got attention from the congressional committee under their policies now, they could have went after us because you
didn't delete our emails.
We didn't delete our emails. They're told, I was even told while the investigation was going on, they enacted this and they were telling me to delete all my emails. And I was like, but aren't we in the middle of a federal investigation?
Not just not delete our emails. One thing that we did that I think was probably our saving grace in this case, and without it, I don't think we would have a case, is we printed every email. We sent every email with a read receipt and a delivery receipt. And then after they had read it, we printed it with the tracking information.
Yeah, if we had a conversation with management,
follow-up email.
Excellent.
Excellent. Because when you get into an MSPB case and you think, oh, but they have to provide that information in discovery. Absolutely not. No, not one of those hundreds and thousands of pages that we had ended up in any discovery from the Social Security Administration. Nothing. Not one email.
So we built a timeline based on what we did, and that's what we went from. We went from our emails that we had, anything that we had, and we built I don't know how many pages.
And that really was a saving grace.
We have like multiple page Excel spreadsheet that we plugged in all of our dates and timelined everything out. So every action that we took is documented in a way. I mean, and there are gaps because, you get exhausted from it. You forget.
Exhausted.
And, but we put this thing in this timeline and we couldn't believe how big this timeline was.
And it was also proof to us that, yes, they are after us. Because every time you see that we would report something, there was something that they retaliated. I mean, you could see it, just one after the other, after the other, after the other. And, and it was, you could clearly see the pattern. And that's how we were able to show the retaliation, of which they said they did an internal investigation and found no retaliation. So
of course not. Yeah. That seems to be the underlying theme. No, retaliation.
They charged one of their own with with retaliating against a government employee, but there was no retaliation.
Yeah. Amazing. But I tell you, the American public owes a huge, debt of gratitude to you. You two are warriors. You're heroes. And I hope you join us in our campaign for making National Whistleblower Day permanent and honoring whistleblowers like you two, because certainly for all that you've done, you have gotten nothing. And that's not right. That's not fair. You are truly, like I say, heroes and warriors. And we thank you for coming on Whistleblower of the Week. Is there anything you'd like to add before we close this podcast?
I think if anybody sees this and is willing to reach out with ideas regarding how we can affect more change in the government, that's something that we really hope that we can proceed with. And so we welcome that contact.
Would you like to give your contact numbers or some sort of social media where people can get a hold of you?
Well, we have an email address. It's aldisabilityservices@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Could you say it one more time?
aldisabilityservices@gmail.com.
Jennifer and Sarah, you are phenomenal people. You are phenomenal whistleblowers. Thank you for spending this time with us. I just admire you so much, and keep up the good fight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.